Americans are asking, why do they hate us? They hate what they see right here in this chamber. A democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms. Our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other.
Canadians are targeted by these terrorists for no other reason than that we are Canadians. They want to harm us because they hate our society and the values it represents, because they hate pluralism, they hate tolerance, and they hate the freedom of others, the freedom we enjoy.
Dozens of protesters were waiting for John Baird following his meeting with the Palestinian foreign minister. They denounced Canada's presence in the West Bank, saying we are not neutral. Shoes and eggs were hurled at Baird as he and his staffers were rushed into their cars. Baird's vehicle was hit, but he was not. Some of his staff, though, were pelted. This person diminishes the rights of our people, takes part and backs the building of settlements, says the protester. Later in Jerusalem, Baird laughed off the incident.
I was in Mike Harris's cabinet for 4 years. I've had a lot worse.
The Canadian officials are downplaying the egging, but it has been making headlines in this part of the world on both Israeli and Palestinian TV. Now, during his visit to the Middle East, Baird struck a balance, meeting with both Israeli and Palestinian officials. Still, Canada remains one of a handful of Western countries to staunchly and continuously defend Israel.
We take the view that a peace process is and progress is best made at the negotiation table, not through unilateral actions on either side. We're proud of that position. We believe it's the best one, and don't apologize for it.
The Prime Minister led a massive Canadian delegation to the Middle East last year, meeting with both sides. But Stephen Harper also refused to criticize Israel when asked about illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
Any attempt to have me, while present in the Middle East, single out the state of Israel for criticism, I will not do.
And that is why Palestinians promise to oppose Canada's involvement in any kind of peace process.
Okay, you realize immaturity means you stick to your story even when you're busted.
They're busted all the time.
And these guys, when I said screwing up and gaining speed, that is not the words for it. One of the most hated nations, and an Islamic hardcore nation, is Saudi Arabia.
Of course, all the world leaders were full of, lovely compliments on King Abdullah after he died. Yeah. And of course, one of the reasons they're so complimentary to that dictatorial regime is because they buy a lot of weapons.
Billions! It's ridiculous! And of course, it's part of the international trade that we don't get a vote on.
Of course, Canada is on contract to sell Saudi Arabia quite a few light armored vehicles. And of course, they may be used for repression of their own people, but
I know. It's not important because they're making profit. So let's run a clip.
It's clear what these protesters think of the Saudi Arabian regime. They're taking up the cause of Raif Badawi, who received the first 50 lashes of a 1,000-lash sentence a couple of weeks ago. His crime? Setting up a blog that insulted Islam. And there are other barbaric practices, like the recent public beheading of a woman. None of it enough to deter Canada from forging closer ties with Saudi Arabia.
Human rights have to be defended everywhere. You cannot just pick and choose where you defend human rights.
Here's a comparison of what Amnesty International has to say about the human rights records of Saudi Arabia and Iran. On every major front, their records are equally abysmal. But Canada has cut off diplomatic relations with only one of them, Iran. Critics say Saudi Arabia's oil and its role in Middle East politics buys it a kind of diplomatic immunity.
We cannot only think about money and arms deals and oil when it comes to Saudi Arabia. We have to start paying meaningful attention to human rights.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister has been more vocal recently, condemning the flogging of Raif Badawi. A spokesman tells Global News, "We will continue to engage with Saudi Arabia on regional security and human rights." But critics say, if anything, our ties to Saudi Arabia are deepening, recently signing a $15 billion arms deal to sell light armored vehicles to the Saudis.
Canadian-made equipment is going directly to the hands of a tyrannical regime. It is entirely conceivable and indeed likely that the Canadian-made armored vehicles will be used to repress the civilian population.
The fear is that with arms deals like this, Canada is doing more to bolster repression in Saudi Arabia than lessen it.
So foreign policy being what it is, the world knows what's going on.
Now that's another reason that why the Islamic State and other radical Islamists don't like Western meddling in their affairs. It's because we tend to support dictators and, nasty regimes.
Yes, and of course we support dictators all the way through Africa and Asia, just as long as they're trading partners. We're looking at major incursions all around the world. Things need to be done, and not selling arms to the bad guys.
Of course, after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, Mr. Harper had to come out and say, I'm for free speech and freedom of the press. Well...
Did that result in some major policy changes?
Not that I saw. Of course, they're repressing the CBC all over the place. But, of course, Operation Maple had a little bit of a satirical look at Mr. Harper's press freedom record.
Can you say irony?
This is an Operation Maple breaking news story. In a stunning about-face, Mr. Stephen Harper confessed just moments ago that his actions while Prime Minister may have had harmful effects on the state of democracy in Canada, and that he vowed to correct these immediately.
When a trio of hooded men struck at some of our most cherished democratic principles, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, they assaulted democracy everywhere.
Mr. Harper said the terrorist attacks at the offices of Charlie Hebdo in Paris have prompted him to reassess his policies. His first decision would be to remove all gag orders placed on scientists, who would now be free to share their research with the public. Members of Parliament would no longer be denied access to information. Still visibly shaken by the attacks on the cartoonists, the Prime Minister spoke of the need to defend a free press and swore to reinstate funding to arts programs across the country and to make himself more available to media. Funding to women's groups would also be restored, as would funding to Kairos, a coalition of church groups that advocates for human rights throughout the world. Operation Maple will be following this story as soon as we can get our jaws off the floor.
Operation Maple, for news that'll rock the soul.
So, of course, we have freedom of speech, and scientists are free, and, women are taken care of, and nah.
Yeah, I know.
I'm trying to say it.
And, of course, the press has free access to our leaders.
Yeah.
No, not really.
And they answer questions. No, they don't answer questions. Major news on the internet, and that's where everybody's getting their news, and that's why we do what we do. I'm Darren Howard.
I'm Robert Isbin.
You're tuned into Video Radio, independent media
for an intelligent world.
Stay tuned. We got more coming up, and it is good.